Dr. Lisa Barnett.
Well, I am excited that my first monograph book, I've written some edited, chapters for some edited collections, but this is my first, it's all on me when the reviews come out, is coming out the first part of May. I have a contract with the University of Oklahoma Press, and they have been guiding me through this process the last couple of years to get it to the final point where it will be out. You can pre-order on Amazon if you're so inclined, or you can pre-order actually directly on the University of Oklahoma Press website as well. I am particularly pleased. This was my dissertation topic when I was at TCU in the history department there, go Frogs, and finally had some time to rework and to revise and to get it ready to be printed. And I am particularly thrilled with the University of Oklahoma Press that they secured permission from the Woody Crumbo family to use this image that he has painted that is out at the Gilcrease for the cover. So that warms my heart. That was one that I kind of wanted, but so what I want to do, this is kind of a longer book talk, so I may kind of rush through some of the slides to try to get to everything with the time that we have, but I just kind of want to give you a preview of what it's about, maybe pique your interest. My book uses the rise of this new American religion called Peyotism that eventually forms itself into a legal structure called the Native American Church, latter 19th, early 20th century. But I'm using this lens, religious lens, as this microcosm to explore some very controversial questions, particularly around what becomes this sort of pan-Indian identity that is rooted in this religious practice. This is a time period, too, where I contextualize this concept of identity with what does it mean to be American? Particularly with all of these immigrants coming over, right? And forcing to navigate this idea of citizenship. This is also a time period where Native Americans were not citizens of the United States of America. That doesn't happen until 1924 officially. And so how do you navigate this idea of what does it mean to be an American in a culture that values citizenship, but values citizenship based upon some preconceived ideas of what it means to be a white American, right? And how do you navigate some of those things? And so what I'm looking at, it's a social history that really kind of encompasses a lot of the political and the legal events surrounding Peyotism and its practitioners. And I look at these terms called Native and American in this political context. And so the purpose is to historicize this religion and its spirituality as part of a broader political struggle, because Peyotism, like all religion, is somewhat political. It is bound up in struggles over identity, land, and sovereignty. And so here's my thesis. Broad. I argue that those Native Americans who were Peyotists resisted the secularization of their religious practice by using the American political and legal systems, ultimately incorporating in 1918 as the Native American Church in order to secure their religious freedom. And in doing so, they're forming this sort of new hybrid cultural identity called Native American that emphasizes the real possibility of honoring Native identity as well as American identity on the path to citizenship status. And it's through their tireless efforts to protect their religion within this legal and political system that these Native Americans, many of whom are not yet American citizens, proved actually to be the true proponents of this constitutional idea of religious freedom. And so the book is divided up into 3 sections. I know that's kind of hard to see. 3 sections with a couple of chapters in each. So really kind of what I want to do is kind of cursorily go through some of these sections. So my first part of the book is the politics about religious identity, and it focuses on the history of this new Native American religion that's based on this little cactus. And the buttons, the tops, those, I don't know if you can see it, these little things that are pulled off and dried into these little buttons that produces, when they're chewed or steeped in water to form a tea, produces a mild, kind of hallucinogenic state. It is non-addictive. No one has ever died from the practice of ingesting these peyote buttons. But it's considered by Native Americans who are peyotists to be a sacred medicine. It has healing properties. And within that, it has been incorporated then into a religious ceremony around not only physical healing, but communal healing, spiritual healing. It is a gift of Creator. And so the religious ceremony offers thanks for Creator and prayers to Creator for healing properties. Let me just skip through. It grows kind of randomly, low to the ground in this kind of semi-arid desert locations. And here's the natural growth region, if you can kind of see in some of the tribes from Mexico that are down there. I'll show a kind of a different map here in a little bit. This is, better yet, along the Rio Grande, up into the El Paso area. There's kind of two areas in Texas. What is really sad is with climate change and some of the destruction of the land where the natural growth region is, it is now confined to 4 counties in Texas where it grows and can be harvested naturally. A larger section in Mexico, but thanks to 1970 Nixon's war on drugs, it's a Schedule I drug and it can't be brought in from Mexico for the religious practice right now. So the history of peyote actually goes back to those indigenous Mexican tribes. We have records from 1620 from the Spanish Inquisition that mention this practice of peyoteism as an apostasy, heretical perversity, a superstition that is condemned by the church. Once it crosses over into what becomes U.S. America, thanks to the Comanche and the Kiowa Apache, it kind of takes off. It starts and it kind of goes through different parts of Oklahoma. I'll have a different map here. And then it quickly spreads up through the northern plains and then even further out west. One of the cool things about doing this book, OU Press said I could have 8 black and white images and 2 maps, so I got to hire a cartographer to make me 2 maps. So this is one of the maps that he made, kind of combining some of those images to show really the path from the natural growth region to the tribes in Oklahoma that start with the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache, then to the Caddo, and how it goes further to the northeast part of Oklahoma, up to Kansas, to Nebraska, and then a little further. I don't have the out west stuff on the map. We couldn't fit all that on the page. But it does show this evolution and this fast spread in the latter part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. And probably the most influential person to bring it to the tribes in what is Oklahoma territory is Quanah Parker with the Comanche. He is one who experienced it. He was gored by a bull when he was in Mexico, and someone gave him peyote to help cure and heal him, and he came back and then establishes part of this religious ceremony around it called the Half Moon Ceremony. The Half Moon Ceremony is the more traditional of the ceremonies in peyoteism that have evolved, with songs in native languages, indigenous languages. It takes place in a teepee. There is a dirt altar that is built in which a peyote cactus is set on top of the altar. It's not necessarily to worship the peyote cactus, but it's to acknowledge that peyote is a mediatory kind of agent to get to Creator. And so that is one of the ceremonies that develops with certain rituals once it comes to the United States. This is actually an image that an anthropologist who in the latter part of the 19th century, 1890, took with a camera in James Mooney when he was down living with the Kiowa and the Comanche there. Now, as the ceremony starts to move in Oklahoma, once it gets to the northeastern part of Oklahoma, there's a Caddo, Delaware medicine man named John Wilson who, with his Catholic background, starts to add some Christian elements to the ceremony that becomes the big moon ceremony. And predominantly is the placing of the altar with not only an east-west, but a north-south line where the altar is to form a cross, so that the peyote cactus sits at the center then of that cross. He also adds some new songs and puts in a kind of a concrete ethical teaching, abstinence from alcohol and gambling, as well as reducing the role of the tobacco that's part of the ceremony. Now, once it goes further north to Nebraska and the northern plains, then it really takes on some Christian elements thanks to John Rave and Albert Hensley from the Winnebagos. They are putting symbols in their crossfire ceremony that are much more Christian recognizable. They ban the use of tobacco. They also include preaching and sermons instead of just the singing and the hymns and the prayers and stuff. There's a Bible placed next to the peyote cactus on the altar as a way to, that peyote opens our understanding of the Christian scriptures. So this hybridization's coming through in peyote as well. And then you get, the Osage have their own ceremony thanks to Black Dog II. And really what he does is changes the altar. Instead of facing the, he faces the altar to the west instead of the east, the opening of the teepee, because when he says for Osage couldn't look for spiritual direction except for the west. Nothing good comes from the east, and I'm sure that's a reference to Washington, D.C. for Black Dog II and the Osage people. Once it goes, and because of their wealth, they're able to construct more permanent kind of wood structures instead of the teepees that go up for their ceremonies. And then the Navajo use their hogans, and they have their own ceremony as well. But what I think is really interesting is the Christian elements that get put on the peyote fans and this kind of hybridization that takes place. So the service itself takes place, as I said, in a teepee or perhaps a wooden structure. There are certain roles of the ceremony. The roadman is not necessarily like a shaman figure, but it's really kind of an organizer. When someone requests a peyote ceremony, it's the roadman that has to make sure the teepee is set up, that has to make sure all of the people are in place, and has to make sure that the supply of peyote is there, the number of buttons and stuff that is ingested periodically through the night. There's drums, there's the fire, the water woman who comes in at different points during the night to bring water, and then to bring breakfast to end the service. Let me tell you about the service. It starts at sundown and it ends at sunup. And it takes place in a teepee where they're sitting around a fire, sitting most of the night. There are breaks, like I said, when the water woman comes in and you can stand and stretch, but for the most part it is an all-night sort of religious ceremony that then starts to catch the attention of Indian agents supervising reservations. Here's a whole list of, in 1883, the Office of Indian Affairs, now the Bureau of Indian Affairs, implements this religious crimes code. They're trying to make peyote illegal just like they're trying to make the ghost dance and the sun dance and the giveaways and all of those religious expressions of indigeneity. They're trying to outlaw it. They try to categorize it as an intoxicant. Oklahoma officials try to get rid of it. I go through all of these in the book. The post office prohibits the mailing for a while. But what is most important for me is these years, from 1937 almost continually until 1937, legislators in Congress propose bills to prohibit the use of peyote. All of those at that point fail. And that, I think, is what is remarkable, is the Peyotists' struggle to keep their religion going. Surprisingly, one of the groups that is opposed to peyoteism is this Society of American Indians that's formed in 1912 from a lot of Native peoples who have been educated at boarding schools. And the goal of the Society of American Indians is this path to citizenship. And one of the reasons that they oppose peyote, this, the new Indian American rising from the, in this modern era, one of the reasons they oppose peyote is they consider it to be a superstitious religious practice. Well, how could we be guaranteed U.S. citizenship if people see us as being stuck in these old traditional ways, right? And I'm going to go back. This is important too. They name themselves, American Indians. And then by 1918, when we're incorporating with the Peyotists, they're calling themselves Native Americans, right? So there's definitely some political turmoil kind of going on between Native Americans at this time. Now, one of the leading opponents in the Society of American Indians is Gertrude Bonnen Sikalasa, who is Yankton Sioux, educated at Carlisle, and here's one of her portraits from her playing the violin. But she is really opposed to peyote. She takes on the role as the secretary of the Society of American Indians and will testify before Congress against peyote use. One of the surprising supporters, the son of Catholic immigrants to America, James Mooney, who lives among the Kiowa and the Comanche, who takes these pictures to document, who also then testifies before Congress, and who then gets pulled from his assignment with the Smithsonian to go back to D.C. for trying to promote this peyoteism. So one of the cool things I think that kind of came out in the book is this politics. This is section 2, racial identity. There is this, it's a borderlands issue. It really is. Because of its natural growth region along the U.S.-Mexico border, it becomes a borderlands issue around trade, and it centers on Laredo, Texas, and right across to Mexico, Nuevo Laredo. And remember, at this time in the late 19th, early 20th century, there is really no border patrol. It is an economic free zone of duty-free trade that crosses the border at this time. It's not until the 1920s with increased immigration that we actually get a border patrol and the fences and stuff to try to keep, and the documentation crossing the border. But in Laredo, the reason it becomes kind of key, it's hard to see on this map of railroads, but there are 4 railroads that intersect in Laredo that take goods across the country. And I think that's and from the peyote fields. So outside of Laredo, I've kind of documented some of the little villages where peyote grows, and people would harvest and dry the peyote buttons and then take them to Laredo, and then they would get on the railroads. And you can see here, this is my second map that I hired a cartographer to make, from Laredo in this area all the way up to Oklahoma and next to a lot of the reservations that are there. And that's how peyote then starts to get shipped to Oklahoma Territory and even further north. In Laredo, there are 2 businesses that become kind of these commercial, mercantile places where the peyote trade becomes a business. Those growers from those little villages would bring the harvest to Villegas and Brothers, one of the mercantile places. The other one was Wormser Brothers. And they would trade the peyote for credit in the store to buy what they needed to live on, food and stuff like that. And then the Villegas and the Wormsers would ship the peyote, then take orders and ship it up to Oklahoma and the northern plains. And again, I'm documenting they couldn't ship it directly to the reservations, but they would ship it to drugstores right next to the reservations, who would then sell it to the Peyotist Native Americans on the reservations. And so these are some. But with that, now it becomes kind of a racialized trade. that there is a lot of talk, well, it's those, we get that rhetoric, those Mexicans influencing those Indians, right? And that really kind of harsh rhetoric of how we racialize it comes into play, which leads to what I think is one of my more fascinating chapters, this idea of an early war on drugs that is starting in the country. Part of the confusion with the research on this is an actual map from the National Anthropological Archives that was presented to the anthropologist James Mooney, who was the first white man to be invited to a peyote ceremony. And it's directions to the mescal eating, the teepee. He inadvertently called it mescal because of the cactus name, but it's not what makes it's mescaline, it is not mescal, right? There's a difference. And so that was part of the confusion, but he was invited to attend the meeting. And so then, once Indian agents and the Bureau decide that they think it's harmful, they start to publicize and attack it. Indian Office makes war on this peyote drug. In fact, one agent goes down to Laredo, buys up the entire supply and burns it, kind of Carrie Nation, in the middle of the square, right? But early on, they try to categorize it as an intoxicant. And here we play on that stereotype of the drunk Indian, right? And in fact, this is a 1913, a 1913 image of that appears about peyote in its place. Time and time again, it's called dry whiskey. And Native Americans are able to stop it from, being part of the prohibition. But once you get the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Harrison Narcotic Act coming, then the Congress legislators and the Indian agents try to categorize it as one of those harsher drugs. It is commonly referred to in the same category as opium, cocaine, and marijuana. Okay? And you see the headlines. Oh my goodness, hashish. Peyote used as drug in Indians' cult of death. I mean, it's just amazing, some of these headlines. The Indian Office makes war. Uncle Sam wages war on this Indian dope. And not only that, some of the headlines talk now, it's a religious war, right? This narcotic is how it's being categorized. Doris Provine's book, Unequal Under the Law, Race in the War on Drugs, notes in her chapter this early racialized war on drugs, blacks in the South associated with cocaine, Mexican marijuana, and of course the anti-Chinese, the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, with the opium. And so my point is, what's missing from her headline are Native Americans and peyote. This is an attempt by Congress to bring Native Americans into this. Again, the headlines are just kind of incredible here. And part of that is the missionaries who are working on the reservations are now having to compete with peyoteism. And it's like, well, if they're at an all-night ceremony on Saturday night, they're not going to show up at church on Sunday morning, right? How are we going to convert? And then you have this, if it's a sacred medicine that heals, wait a minute, we have Western doctors that are serving on the reservations now. Native people are not seeing the Western doctors, they're using this peyote to heal themselves, right? And that dichotomy between modernization and progress and indigenous ways, and this idea too of progress and time away from work. I love this. Those all-night ceremonies take away from the time that should normally be devoted to work, kind of Weber's Protestant work ethic, right? Work hard, do your farming and your fields. And so then that gets us into the last section of the book, this politics around the political identity. And this is where one chapter focuses just on the use of the legal and the political systems. Here's where I was talking about this racialized kind of rhetoric that comes out from some of the headlines there. Blame it on Mexico. And this idea, too, that it's mescal, right? And it's this imprecise language that follows. Quanah Parker tells legislators that white man has taken all they had and now seeks to interfere with his religion. Quanah Parker is all the time testifying. And in fact, there is a delegation of Peyotists. Oh, there's 2 court cases that come out and some laws here. I forgot I had those in there. Now we enter the political arena here. The laws, you know, you can do so much with the laws, but the political arena is what's funny. There's a delegation of Peyotists that meet with the medical committee before the Oklahoma Constitutional Convention in 1907 to talk about the benefits of peyote. And there's Quanah Parker, right in the center leading. And what's interesting, this delegation of Native peoples is not just Comanche. It is Comanche, it is Kiowa, it is Apache, it is Ponca. It is a representation of a lot of the different tribes that are out there. And what I started discovering is that tribes that had some money, particularly like the Osage, would, all of these years of the congressional delegations trying to get a bill to criminalize it, they would send delegates to Washington, D.C. to lobby the congressman to vote against the legislation. And this is an image that I found of the Osages who went to Washington, D.C. and stories that they are testifying in committee meetings that Congress is having on this peyote issue. And this is what was so fascinating, is that the record is showing Native peoples speaking out in favor of their religion, and it's being recorded in the congressional record with all of these congressional hearings. And then I have a little section as well where I talk about dressing for success, the use of clothing as political identity, and this phrase that I saw a lot in the archives, citizens' clothing, citizens' dress, right? You remember that picture of Quanah Parker at the Oklahoma Constitutional Convention in the suit, right? It's a different Quanah Parker, but he's playing a political identity in order to secure some religious freedom rights. Now, the opponent of peyote, Gertrude Bonin, Sitkala-Saw, here she is, right, in her boarding school, but also a postcard that she sends out that shows more of the native dress. She shows up in 1918 to testify at the congressional hearings, dressed like this. It makes the headlines. Not the normal dress that she wears. And James Mooney, the anthropologist, rips her when he testifies, saying she doesn't even know her native identity because that gown that she's wearing comes from the Plains tribes, not from the northern plains, but from the southern plains. The belt is a man's belt, right? And the fan that she's holding is a peyote fan. She doesn't even know who she is in terms of native identity. She's playing a performative role here for you all. That's what got him yanked from the field work back to Washington, D.C. And so I'm just going to so what do they do in the end? This rhetoric part. They're a church, but they're not really a church. I'm going to skip through the first church that's incorporated by the Oto in 1914, that's still in existence today, to go to 1918 when the Native American Church of Oklahoma is officially legally incorporated by the state of Oklahoma to protect their religious identity. But this is their church, right? It's not the typical building, and yet they are able to, preserve their religious right by incorporating. Later in the 20th century, they're issued these membership cards, which they didn't know at the time how important these membership cards would be, because this is what allows, once it gets criminalized in 1970, this is what allows then people to participate in the religious ceremonies. But not only do they call themselves a church in their Articles of Incorporation in 1918, but they start using this phrase, peyote is a sacrament. And Article 2 spells out how it is a sacrament. They're using Christian words now to support their practice. And when they started testifying from Congress, right? I love this one. We use this medicine as the Catholic people use wine as a sacrifice, just the same as the Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, and other denominations break bread and drink wine. And by 1908, this is the rhetoric that starts coming up in the newspaper articles as well, that it is a sacrament. Now put this also in context too. Alcohol prohibition. But guess what? Even with prohibition, there are two exceptions because it is a sacrament. The Catholics and Jewish non-kosher wine. So they still get to use wine in those religious ceremonies because they are claiming it is a sacrament. So Native Americans, when they incorporate in 1918, say, hey, guess what? Peyote is not just a medicine, it's a sacrament. There's a loophole that even if you were to say it's an intoxicant, which it's not, we get to continue to use it. So just the idea of co-opting some of that rhetoric is very important. And as I said in the afterwards, it's not until 1965 that the federal government is able to put an amendment to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, declaring it a dangerous drug. 1970, it officially gets listed on the Controlled Substance Act as a Schedule I hallucinogenic substance with a high potential for abuse, even though there is no documented record of addiction or death. And now, because it is controlled by the federal government, to grow it in Texas, you have to have a card that you can distribute it. You have to have cards for your employees, and you have to provide receipts. Those who come across to purchase it, when it's shipped across the border, you have to have receipts for all of that and proof of membership in the Native American Church in order to buy it. And as I mentioned, the conservation concerns right now, the destruction of some of the land and stuff that's there. I just kind of finalized with that. And another Crumbo painting that I absolutely love from the Gilcrease to kind of end this. But I will say, once it kind of came out, I didn't know who my readers and stuff were, under review, or who was going to do blurbs on the back cover until Amazon listed it and the press listed it. So one author, Russell Cobb, I met him at a conference a couple years ago, says, I demystify the practice without disparaging, shows how the peyotism and the Native American Church fit in this vast and complicated contact zone between settler colonialism and indigenous ways of life. My friend Don Fixico talks of it's a welcome contribution to understanding pivotal years where Native people forged a new religion that gave them hope in the face of 20th century modernity. Now, a lot of people are saying that women were not permitted into the ceremonies until the later 20th century. That was one of the reader responses. And so I found an early article that says, from one of the snitches on the reservations, here's a list of who went to this peyote ceremony, and there are a lot of women listed. The problem is we just don't know a lot about these women, and so that, is further researched. Who are they? But they were permitted early on into the ceremonies, surprisingly.
Any more on this side, the left side? Okay, come
Got
on.
a couple of hands over here.
Yeah. Let's see. You want to...
Yeah, I just wonder if you can speak to looking at our audience and some of the questions already, can you speak to some of the research being done on peyote as a healing medicine?
Oh gosh, yes.
Status of that?
Yeah, the early recollections of a lot of these people, but there's some new recent work. His name is Joseph Calabrese. He is a psychiatrist, so a medical doctor, but he's done a lot about healing properties for addiction. And in fact, during the hearings in 1918, all of the Peyotists were talking about how peyote was a remedy for not just physical illnesses, but for alcoholism. Right? That was one of the reasons why they were advocating this ethical way within this religious structure, saying that it was a cure for alcoholism. And then Calabrese more recently and some others have kind of taken that up and proved that yes, there is a healing kind of property that comes with this. They call it the peyote road, right? That cures addictions. And to advocate use for that in a lot of the well-being, sobriety kind of programs and stuff.
I'm coming. I'm going to do what Mark McFarland does, and I stay out of the camera view, so we're going to work our way down.
Okay.
You had a question?
Sorry, Lori, we'll get to you, I promise. Go ahead.
Well, that was my question, or part of my question too, and that is the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
And all the companies that will grab onto any idea and really try to make something out of it. And wondered if that has happened at all.
Early on, when it was introduced, Park Davis was researching, and then when the federal government and the Indian agents started opposing it because of, well, we can't convert them and all of this stuff, then Park Davis scaled back and said, no, we're not touching that for a drug. So, yeah, there were some early pharmaceutical companies. But because now it's become so entwined into a religious practice, pharmaceutical companies are respecting that boundary that it is part of the religion.
Well, that kind of led to another question that I had during the presentation. And did the actual indigenous Americans try to alter their worship service, such as not making it last all night? Practical things that would weave them into more of the mainstream practice of religion, Christianity.
No, the only thing that they did when John Wilson and Albert Hensley and John Rave and all of those, the only thing that they changed were adding some Christian elements and some Christian hymns and, you know, maybe changing the language to include English hymns and stuff. That's the only change. It is still erect a teepee, all-night ceremony. In fact, there's a church in Norman, a Methodist church in Norman, when Chabon Colonel was the pastor there. He's now their head of Indigenous Relations. But they used their parking lot for OU students who were members of the Peyote Church to set up a teepee in their parking lot in order for them to hold Peyote services on a Saturday all-night service. So yeah, it's still very much incorporated into the religious practice.
I had a comment and then a question. You know, there are political action groups now pushing for the DEA to approve hallucinogens,
Yes.
like ketamine, which has been approved
Yep.
for treatment for depression and anxiety, very effective for PTSD, depression, anxiety, drug abuse, all those kind of things. And mushrooms were just not approved by the DEA. But it'll be interesting to see if peyote becomes one of those. And then my question is, can you describe a little bit about how they use, I mean, my understanding is that they have visions and religious revelations. How is that used within the ceremony?
Yeah, it's one of those things, because in Mexico, the ceremony with the Huicholi people and stuff, when they do their annual peyote hunt, which is still in practice, and they come together, it's very outdoors, dancing and, you know, singing and stuff like that. And there is a tribal elder who, everybody takes peyote, but that person interprets for the community. Within the American context, it's we don't want the Indian agents noticing, so we're going to move it indoors and we're going to sit and we're just going to drum and sing and pray. And individually, Creator speaks. It's much more democratic and egalitarian in a U.S. context, the ceremony itself. But it's the synesthesia is the technical term for the effects. It's like you can hear colors and, you know, see things and stuff. But it's the visions that you get from Creator, and then you leave and you get to interpret how Creator has spoken to you in order to heal you physically, to heal the community. Again, a peyote, it's not happening every Saturday night. It's only when someone requests a service for specific healing and prayer. that it's established. And in fact, during World War I and World War II, a lot of Native soldiers would carry a little peyote button in a bag for protection, right? Again, kind of carrying Creator with them, just like a lot of the servicemen carried Bibles in their pockets and stuff. So there is kind of that connection. And yes, there is a movement now to try to decriminalize, to get peyote off the Schedule I, because again, for Native Americans who are incarcerated, who are peyotists, they cannot have a religious ceremony since it is a Schedule I drug within their incarcerated existence. And so there is some work being done to try to push for that.
When you mentioned there's interpretation of what visions someone may have, I thought, well, that's like the speaking in tongues. You know, someone who's speaking in tongues, that special connection, that they have an interpretation.
Right, yeah. It's that individual message that Creator gives to you on how you can be a better person and how you can, live out your life in community.
Anybody here in this area had a question? Oh, right.
Since it's grown in Mexico, and the cartels like to exploit things, is there any damage there where the cartels might begin to exploit peyote?
I have not heard any stories or any reports about cartel involvement, simply because it's only sold to Native American church members. It's a very small market, and because it's not addictive. So it's not like you're trying to increase your sales with the addiction quality. So no, I've not heard anything like that.
Okay.
I have a quick question about the young lady that was at the boarding school.
Yeah, Gertrude Bonin.
We've been watching 1923, the Taylor Sheridan story, and a lot of it deals with the Indians, young ladies that had to go to a boarding school. Was she that Americanized that she was against it and she was trying to just prove that, you think?
Yeah, I mean, she gave herself the name Sikalasa. It wasn't a name that, she had kind of been raised, but had gone to the boarding school and become so Americanized that then she becomes kind of part of the ranks of the Society of American Indians. She serves as a missionary out to the Utes in Utah, right? And her big campaign is sanitation and cleanliness and all of that, trying to sort of modernize. But again, the goal of the Society of American Indians is for citizenship status. And that's what they're all after, is to try to get citizenship for the people.
One more? Thank you to all my pointers.
Yeah.
Can you explain the fundamental theology or beliefs of Peyotes? Who are they worshiping? What are they doing?
They're worshiping Creator.
Yeah.
And right, yeah, I mean, Creator, and the goal of the ceremony, again, with Native American epistemological views, all creation, human, non-human, are our relatives, and we're trying to bring balance back to those kind of relations. So when there is a fight in a family, that destroys the balance of peace and harmony. When there's a fight in the community, that destroys the balance. And so we're trying to bring things back into balance, and we come to worship in order to hear from Creator how we can do that, how we can be better people and contribute to the collective good. I mean, they believe this and this and this. It's just part of a worldview that is embodied in indigenous cultures.
You used a big word, epistemological.
Thinking, the worldview, sorry, how we think about the world, right? We Western people tend to think about the world in this very linear fashion from point A to point B, and that's progress, right? Native peoples think about it in a very circular fashion, that it's not just today, past, present, and future. Past means all the relatives that have gone behind us, and we live for 7 generations out. Actions we do today, that's what guides a lot of Native thinking. Actions today should impact 7 generations out. So we need to think more carefully about what we do today to Mother Earth and to, to ourselves if we're trying to think 7 generations ahead.
Do you have Native American blood in you?
I am a tribal, and I say this in my introduction, I'm a tribal member of a non-federally recognized tribe that is working on federal recognition. So I don't claim any sort of indigenous identity and have never profited from any of that indigenous identity through scholarships or anything like that, simply because it's non-federally recognized. But I am a tribal, I have a card.
Do they have a sacred text that they use, that they keep?
No.
No text?
No text.
So how are they continuing forward?
It's all oral, it's oral tradition and doing,
still,
right?
yeah.
The hymns that are sung within the peyote. Now, I will say, some of the peyote songs have been recorded, and you can actually buy recordings of peyote songs that were written for peyote services and sung in native languages and stuff like that. But a lot of it is just passed on by the doing. And that's why when I interviewed the Oto roadman, his big complaint, these young people today just don't want to come and learn the songs and the culture and come to church, right? I mean, they're experiencing some of that same kind of generational conflict.
So is there a requirement that you have some Native American?
Yes, you need to be a member in order to be part of the ceremony. You need to be a member of the tribe. But it's very ecumenical, because if the Oto are having a ceremony and a Ponca is on the reservation area land visiting, the Ponca is welcome to come and to sing in their language, right, the hymns and to offer prayers. Yeah.
Well, we need to quit here, but oh boy, did you stir up stuff. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Barnett.